It was a cool autumn evening in 1944. The air had a crispness that hinted at the coming winter, and the small French village of Saint-Michel lay in a state of uneasy calm. The war had ravaged much of Europe, and this town, like so many others, bore the scars of conflict. Bombed-out buildings and the constant whisper of danger were a part of everyday life now, but for the soldiers stationed there, this was just another night on duty. Or so they thought. Among the American forces deployed in the area was Corporal James "Jimmy" Anderson, a hardened Marine who had seen more than his fair share of battles. Having fought in the brutal campaigns across North Africa and Italy, Anderson had grown accustomed to the horrors of war. His once youthful face was now lined with the experiences of conflict, and his once bright eyes now carried a shadow of weariness. He had seen death, betrayal, and destruction, and believed there was nothing that could surprise him anymore. But that night, as he patrolled the village outskirts, Anderson was about to encounter something, or rather, someone, that would shake him to his core. The night was unusually quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Anderson moved cautiously, his rifle at the ready, eyes scanning the darkened streets and alleyways for any sign of movement. He was part of a routine patrol, checking for any German soldiers who might be lurking in the shadows. The war was still far from over, and enemy spies were known to operate behind the front lines, gathering intelligence and sabotaging Allied efforts. As Anderson rounded a corner, his instincts kicked in. There, in the faint glow of a street lamp, stood a figure. The person was cloaked in shadows, their features obscured, but there was something about the way they moved that immediately put Anderson on edge. He gripped his rifle tighter, his heartbeat quickening. "Hey, you there," Anderson called out, his voice firm but not overly aggressive. The figure didn't respond, instead turning slowly and walking further into the shadows. Anderson's training took over. He followed cautiously but quickly, keeping a safe distance while trying to get a better look. The figure moved with an unsettling grace, as if they were intimately familiar with the dark, twisting streets of the village. Anderson's mind raced. Could this be one of the villagers, a soldier, or worse, a German spy? As he closed the distance, he finally caught a glimpse of the figure's face under the dim light of the moon. Anderson stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. It was a woman. She had sharp, elegant features, her blonde hair tied tightly back, and her eyes, piercing blue, were locked onto his with a cold, calculating intensity. Anderson was stunned. He had expected to find a male enemy soldier, or perhaps a local collaborator, but this was something entirely different. "Who are you?" Anderson demanded, his voice trembling slightly, though he tried to maintain his composure. He had never seen a woman in enemy uniform before, let alone one who carried herself with such authority and confidence. She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. In one fluid motion, she turned and darted into an alleyway, her movements swift and deliberate. Without thinking, Anderson gave chase, his boots pounding the cobblestone streets as he pursued her through the maze of narrow passages. His heart raced, not just from the exertion, but from the confusion and disbelief swirling in his mind. Who was this woman, and why was she here? As they neared the edge of the village, Anderson managed to close the gap. With a burst of speed, he tackled her to the ground, both of them crashing onto the cold, hard earth. For a moment they struggled, the woman surprisingly strong and agile. She fought back with a fierceness Anderson hadn't anticipated, but he was a Marine, trained for combat, and soon had her pinned beneath him. "Stop," he shouted, breathing heavily. "You're coming with me." The woman glared at him, her blue eyes burning with defiance, but she didn't speak. Anderson quickly bound her wrists with a length of rope he had on hand. As he stood her up, he noticed something that sent another shock through him. On her jacket was the insignia of the German military. This wasn't just any woman, she was a spy. As they made their way back to the village square, Anderson couldn't shake the feeling of unease. This woman, this German spy, was unlike anyone he had encountered before. There was an aura of mystery about her, something that suggested she was more than just a soldier. She was cunning, dangerous, and had likely been operating right under the noses of the American forces for some time. Back at the command post, Anderson handed her over to the intelligence officers, who would no doubt interrogate her for information. But even as she was led away, she turned her head and met his gaze one last time, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. It was a look that sent a shiver down Anderson's spine. He knew in that moment that this encounter was far from over. The interrogation. The following day, Anderson was called into the intelligence office. The officers there were seasoned interrogators, but even they seemed unsettled by the woman. "We've been at it for hours," one of them admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. "She won't break. She's different." Anderson sat down across from her, hoping to glean something from their brief encounter. Her hands were bound, and her face remained impassive, betraying no emotion. The questions began: name, rank, mission, but she answered none of them. She simply stared back at Anderson with those piercing blue eyes. "You're wasting your time, Corporal," one of the interrogators said in frustration. She's trained for this. We might not get anything out of her. But Anderson couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. The war was filled with mysteries, but this one felt personal. She wasn't just another enemy soldier. She was someone who had been working in the shadows, gathering secrets, and playing a dangerous game that Anderson had unwittingly become a part of. The spy's escape days passed, and the spy remained in custody, her silence becoming a symbol of the unbreakable resolve of the German intelligence network. Then, one night, she vanished. The guards posted outside her cell swore they had seen nothing, heard nothing, but when they went to check, the cell was empty. Anderson was furious. How could someone under such heavy guard simply disappear? Had she been helped by someone on the inside? The questions swirled in his mind, but answers were elusive. The spy had slipped through their fingers, leaving behind nothing but a haunting memory for Anderson. The war would continue, and he would fight many more battles, but the image of the German spy, with her cold blue eyes and enigmatic smile, would never leave him. Conclusion. In the end, Anderson would never know her true identity or the full extent of her mission. The war had a way of erasing people, turning them into shadows in the grander scheme of things. But for him, that one night in the village of Saint-Michel would remain etched in his mind, a reminder that in war, nothing is ever as it seems, and the most dangerous enemies are often those who hide